you so much for that introduction, and for everybody that's out there. Hello, for those of you who have had me once before, did you miss me? And for those of you who are looking to join our fantastic lineup of students, we welcome you, and hopefully that this little demonstration will inspire you. A little bit about myself. So I actually am a career changer, which is one of the things that I love so much about being a pastry chef. Is this is my second career. So I chose this one because it's exactly where I wanted to be. I started off as an actor, dancer, singer. I did like, I don't know, maybe 11 years on Broadway, did some film and TV stuff. You might also know me as Pablo from the Backyardigans. So that's sort of some of that part of my life. And I had a fantastic career. I worked with some amazing people, and I loved every second of it. But when I decided to retire, I wanted to go to something that I also loved, and that was baking. So I gravitated towards the French Culinary Institute, where I graduated top of my class. So I am a total baking nerd. I've worked for James Beard, award-winning pastry chef. I had my own business. I opened a bed and breakfast. I opened a standalone bakery. I live in Maryland and was celebrated as the best chef on the Eastern Shore in 2017. I was also celebrated with Best Dessert on the Eastern Shore in 2017. You might also know me from my stint on Food Network, Holiday Baking Championship Season 2, some other things, and spoiler alert, winner of Season 1 of Food Network's Haunted Gingerbread Showdown, all available on Hulu or Discovery Plus. You might also know me from my own web series, YouTube, The Sweet Life of Steve. So please make sure you check that out, like, and subscribe. Anyway, last year we had to close our bakery due to the COVID, and I found myself at the doors of Escoffier, and I love it here. One of my favorite parts about my job is I've been doing this for a while, and every time a student submits an assignment, it's like I'm seeing it again for the very first time through a very fresh set of eyes. It's so inspiring, and as I see all of the work that my students are doing, I love watching them grow and thrive and prepare to take this industry by storm. So for those of you who are current students, we so can't wait for you to join the ranks of us in the professional world. And for those of you that are thinking about signing up for school, this is the place to be if you want to take that next step towards a career in the pastry arts. So I'm also sort of by trade, one of the things I did a lot was wedding cake design. So that's what we're going to kind of do. Right now, I am currently the cakes instructor, which is the last class of our curriculum before going off to externship. So I thought I would take a few minutes and share some stuff that we use here in our curriculum for our cakes program. And of course, if you've got any questions, you may feel free to type those in the chat. We're kind of going to go like super quick here with some of the stuff I'm showing. Hope will moderate, and if there's any questions, she's going to read them out to me. Otherwise, we'll have a few moments for a Q&A afterwards. So bear with me while I change angles on my camera. Okay, so we're going to start with essentially some of the basics when it comes to cake decorating tools. So in the beginning of our cake decorating program, we work a lot with buttercreams. And some of the most important tools for buttercream, of course, are first and foremost our offset spatulas. This is essentially the equivalent of the knife for the pastry chef. We can smear and spread all manner of things. All of our fillings are buttercreams with our offset spatulas, and we should work with them as if they are an extension of our hand. I sometimes like to even throw up the pinky while I'm using it, just because I feel fancy. We, of course, have our turntable, which is so important for the creation of level and even cakes. And then one of our other tools, which is really essential, is the piping bag. So not only do we use this for buttercreams and decorations, but this is our main vessel for applying fillings, for even working with things like pâte à choux or stuff like that, which is done earlier in our curriculum. We have a bunch of assorted tips here, some of my favorites being the round tip, which again is not just used for decoration, but it's also used for filling, and our star tip. We've got some variations on these, of course, which is the closed star tip. This makes a bit more of a tighter decorative element, or my favorite, the French tip. It's got a lot more teeth than your normal star tip does and is really beautiful, especially when we're using meringues. Talk about a couple other fancy dancy tips here, one of which is the Gâteau Saint Honoré tip. And you may not know, but Saint Honoré is the patron saint of pastry chefs. So there is a dessert dedicated especially towards him, which is made out of pâte à choux, or essentially cream puffs. And lastly, another one of my favorites, the petal tip. So I'm actually going to kind of show you something that we can do with this one, which is to make flowers out of buttercream. So this is something that we actually do in our week 3 assignment with our cakes. And we take a rose nail, which is essentially like a little miniature turntable, so that we can work right on it. Then I'm going to take some buttercream. I've got this really pretty yellow right here. And we start making sure that our buttercream is nice and fluid. There we go. So to make our rose, of course, there's a fat end and a skinny end of our tip. What we want to make sure is that the fat end sits towards the middle and the skinny end sits towards the outside. Now, one of the fun things about this is we can turn the table either way. And then basically what we kind of start to do is build up a little pyramid. And then we just build it up a little bit more. Now, if it's not perfect, we can just fix it, right? Just sort of like this. First petal on our rose is the most important one. What we're going to do is basically create like a little, almost like a little blanket that wraps around the top. And then working with our pastry bag at essentially a 90-degree angle, we go up and over as we go around and start making the petals for our rose. Once we've got our internal ones, we can kind of keep adding up and over, up and over, up and over, up and over, up and over. And then we keep building and building along until we have the desired shape and size. Once we get more towards the outside, you'll notice that I actually kind of tip my piping tip back. And there, look at that. A pretty, pretty little rose. Now, of course, since it's made out of buttercream, we can do all kinds of stuff with this. I usually would just go ahead and we would use some fancy scissors. You come underneath, give it a little snip, and then you can place it right onto the cake itself. Once it's been placed on a cake, we would take our leaf tip, which is another thing we work with here in our curriculum. It looks like a little V. And now we can go ahead and we can make a bunch of pretty leaves for this. And in no time at all, we have a decorative little element for the top of our cake. And it's really tasty too. Another thing that I wanted to show you is a border, especially our pearl border. I'm going to be using a fun green buttercream here. Pearl border is actually one of the harder borders to do because we need to make sure that we are holding our piping bag at a 45-degree angle. We always squeeze with our dominant hand. So I'm right-handed. I squeeze with that, but I drive with my non-dominant hand because it actually takes more brain power to drive than it does to squeeze. So essentially, I just do a little squeeze, making a little bead. Not that one. That was ugly. A little bead, pull out. A little bead, pull out. So it's called a pearl border because at the end of the day, it should look like a nice little string of pearls. Just like that. And with the same tip, if I increase my tempo, I can actually just make it bigger. So it's not always about the right tool for the job, as it is the right technique for the job. So there's a little bit of fun stuff we do here with buttercream in our program. Now, of course, piping being the sort of basis for so much of decoration, we also graduate towards fondant. So in our final assignment, our students make a 2-tiered cake in which they need to cover it with fondant. They need to make some gum paste flowers, and they get to do designs of their choice. So I'm just going to pretend that this wasn't here. Get rid of all this. And then I want to show you some fun stuff that we can do with fondant. So thanks to the magic of television, we have a bunch of stuff set up here. Hope, can we see all this really well? Can you give me an audible on that?
If you can zoom out a little bit more so we can see it fully. Yeah, go up a little bit.
I think this is about as up as I can go, but I'm going to do some holy poos. So some basic fondant tools. Of course, we have our fondant rolling pin. This is a little mini one. This is used for when we're doing gum paste flowers and such. But of course, if we're covering a cake, we'll use a bigger one. I've got various cutters that we'll be using to make flowers. I have my fondant smoother, which is so important for making sure that we have nice smooth fondant on the sides of our cake. I have an assortment of fondant tools. The biggest one that we use is the ball tool, which I'm going to demonstrate for you in just one moment. But there's all these other fun fondant tools here. We have ones that can be used for cutting. We have these sort of fun little star ones, which is great for making little detailed moments when it comes to flowers and bulbs and so on. This tool is really good for indenting and creating sharp creases. And then there's also like a miniature ball on the end of that. I have maybe like 9 sets of these because inevitably something gets lost and then you find it later on. For making flowers, we will use floral wire, which can be found in any craft store, and floral tape, which can also be found in any craft store. We use a gum paste glue, and with all of this stuff, we can make a bunch of pretty flowers. So I have essentially what is the equivalent of kind of like an open rose here. I have some smaller roses here, and then I even have some pluminera, which is the flower sort of native to Hawaii. Fondant, which I want to show you, and then some gum paste. So let's go ahead and play with fondant for a second. Get this stuff out of the way. One of the things that I love about fondant is how forgiving it actually can be. So if you ever had the benefit of playing with Play-Doh as a kid, this is totally for you. Fondant, as we knead it, can kind of get a little bit stringy. You can kind of see here, it almost like takes on a bit of like an aeration type of quality. But it's really great for covering cakes. You can also cut all sorts of decorations out of this to do things that we kind of refer to as like applique or so on as part of our decorative elements that we can do. One of the things that I wanted to show you is how fondant takes on texture. So I actually have, believe it or not, this is a sock, right? Thank you, Haynes. And it's filled with a little bit of cornstarch. And that's what I'm going to kind of cover my surface with, making it so much easier for me to roll out my fondant. A fondant pin is really key for fondant because it's plastic, so it's non-porous, whereas like a wooden rolling pin, for example, can leave creases and marks. So just like rolling out any other dough, we want to make sure that it's never sticky. As I'm rolling things out, notice my fondant will never stick to the surface. And depending on the brand that you have, you can get this paper thin. This brand is called Our Color, and it's actually my favorite. It's made in Brazil, and it is designed to be really worthwhile in humid environments. So I've rolled out some fondant, and then I have this fun little thing, which is called an impression mat. So all it is a piece of plastic that has a pattern on it. And I can simply place it on top of my fondant and give it a bit of a gentle press. Sometimes a bit of an aggressive press, depending on how much I need to get through it. And in a matter of seconds, I have this wonderful decorative embossed pattern on my fondant itself.
Now, Chef Steve, someone asked, can you use powdered sugar instead of cornstarch?
You should not use powdered sugar for rolling out your fondant. That was an excellent question. And one of the reasons being is because sugar is hygroscopic by nature, meaning it absorbs moisture. So what's going to happen is if you roll out your fondant just in powdered sugar, it'll actually start to pull the moisture out of the fondant, causing it to dry out. Now, cornstarch also is a drying element by nature, but what it does is it kind of protects the fondant a little bit. And when you place your fondant on top of your cake, if it's been rolled out in cornstarch, any little bit of cornstarch that's on the bottom might start to absorb some moisture from your buttercream if your buttercream starts to sweat. So it's actually a lot better for rolling out. That was an excellent question. Thank you so very much for asking. I'm now going to go to some gum paste, which is sort of akin to fondant, except it has a lot more drying qualities to it. It's got CMC in it. It's got a bit more gelatin, and it's even more forgiving than fondant. It doesn't really taste that great, so we almost exclusively just use it for decorations that we would probably never really eat, being sugar flowers, for example. One of the reasons we don't ever really want to eat sugar flowers is because they're often wired. And who wants to get some wire in their teeth? That would be yucky. The other thing about gum paste is it's a lot more pliable. So I can roll my gum paste like incredibly, almost paper thin before I even need to start working with it. You can kind of see here already how thin it is, and I can actually go a lot thinner. So one of the things that we do is we make some flowers. So I'm just going to cut a couple little petals here. Just like that. And then I would use my ball tool and thin these out. Now, of course, I did a terrible mise en place today, so I didn't get my mat in place, but that's okay. Necessity is the mother of invention. I actually can even just use my ball tool and thin this out right on top of my little cornstarch sachet here. And one of the reasons we use our ball tool, again, getting that gum paste really, really nice and thin. So in a matter of seconds, I've been able to kind of get the edges very, very thin. I can even use my fingers if I need to. And the idea with gum paste flowers especially is we're trying to just trick the eye. So I have one that I've kind of already started here. I start with a center that basically looks like this, a cone. And then I add a couple petals to it to kind of create almost like a blossom. And now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add another petal to this. So I can use my gum paste glue. Come in here with a brush. And what I want to do is adhere the bottom third of my petal and then kind of up through the middle. And then I would come and place my petal right in the center. And then I would essentially only attach one edge, leaving the other edge exposed. And I would start to sort of fold this back a little bit. And this is kind of where it becomes a situation of just starting to use your own creativity. Then I would come with another petal, which I have right here, thin it out and do the same sort of thing. Now we have a lot of different ways of there are materials, they make cake foams and all that kind of stuff, but there's a lot of things that we can kind of really get creative with when it comes to the tools that we might need. If you have a crafting sensibility, sugar flowers really is something that could be kind of totally up your alley, because at this point, it's not really baking. What it is more, it's like, I kind of like to think of it as crafting. And I place that second petal underneath the first one and wrap it around. And then I can come back and start to fix it. And you see, I have this nice beginning of a fun little rose. And I just keep adding and adding and adding to it. And then I eventually will have something that looks like this. And these are things that we can make it over the course of, they usually take about 15 or 20 minutes to make, but they take 2 days to dry. So as we're working on our project, we often find that more often or not, the most important ingredient in any recipe is time.